Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another Technology Accelerator video. And want to welcome you all because we're all about using technology to scale business. And the reason we do this is because technology projects are not always easy, but they should be straightforward. So my goal is to help you simplify complexity and accelerate your technology adoption. And today we're going to be talking about vendor voodoo, the magic of working with technology vendors, because they're absolutely key to any technology project, any technology scaling, and quite frankly, any business scaling these days needs new technology at some point. And as part of that, you have to work with technology vendors. And I'm coming at this from a place of I used to work with technology vendors. I used to be a customer and also to be work in a technology vendor firm. So I used to provide technology services and systems to clients as well. So I've seen both sides of the fence, and the point of today is I wanted to share some insights, some tips, some advice in terms of how to get the best of a negotiation, an agreement, and a working practice with a technology vendor, so it works for both sides. Because it really is not about them and us, which is where I started my career, and I'll share that in a second. It's now all about a partnership because you're going to be creating a long-term partnership with technology and the vendor, and you want to make sure it works. So before we jump in, I just want to make sure, just check the live stream's working okay. So seeing a few people join, which is awesome. Welcome to the broadcast. And got a couple of comments in DM earlier today as well and yesterday. So thank you for that. I'll make sure I cover those as part of this presentation. So let's jump into it. And what I want to cover first is the fact that this is part of a implementation of any scaling project when you use technology, and it's actually the second most important step. I'm going to show you this chart here, this 9-step framework that I use for my technology adoption accelerator programs. And you'll notice that design the future is circled there, number 2. And design the future includes the technology you're going to use to ultimately scale your business. And that's a number of steps before number 6, which is when you launch the project. So you need to decide your future, what technology, and everything else that goes with that, including the team and the setup of your business and the goals you want to achieve as part of that step 2. You'll also notice that step 2 is after define the problems. So with any technology adoption, with any business scaling, you always start with the business problems. I can't say this enough because the amount of times that, myself included, sometimes we jump to technology, it's new and a shiny object, and we really want to get that technology implemented, but we always need to dial it back to what's that business problem we're trying to solve. What result are we trying to get to? Why are we looking at new technology in the first place? Because we have to be careful here, because if we just pick technology based on what it can do rather than what it can solve, then we'll end up getting something we don't need to. It's looking for a problem to solve as opposed to the other way around, that we have a specific problem that we need solving. So we don't need to look for that problem to be solved. So as part of step 2 here, we design the future. We evaluate and select technology. So, and also the vendor that goes with that. So what does that look like? Let's dive into the technology vendor assessment process. So I'm coming at this from a client or a business point of view, but it also applies to vendors as well, technology vendors, because they'll go through this process with many of their clients. So having seen this over many years, all the way back from the early 2000s is when I started my technology career. Well, actually in the late 90s when I started my technology career, but outsourcing suddenly became a thing towards the late 90s in the UK as we were going into the year 2000 and the millennium bug, for any of you remember that. But then in early 2000, we started to go through a bit of an outsourcing craze in the UK. I'm assuming it was the same in North America. And what happened is a lot of the coding, application support, operations maintenance, patching, database upgrades, and even some of the implementations was all outsourced. It was almost a wave of outsourcing happening to big companies like CSC, TCS, Tata Consulting Services, IBM, Microsoft. Everyone was doing outsourcing. All the clients were doing outsourcing at that time. which was interesting because in the mid 2000s, around 2004, 2005, there was also a big wave of insourcing, of bringing systems back in, or system support and application development back into the companies. And the reasons for that is, I think the early 2000s were, it was a bit of a rush to outsourcing. It was new to a lot of companies and in the industry in general. So we had to work through a lot of things, and unfortunately, that set some bad habits around creating what I found in some of the clients I was working with. We created a bit of a them and us culture, and it wasn't intentional. It's just because it was new and people were still finding their way, finding their way in terms of how do we manage the relationship between vendors and clients. So now it's settled down. It's come to it's a lot more mature. 20 years later. So now we're in a position where we have a good way of understanding how we work together from both sides. So what I want to do now is take you through a real high level step, because we only have a bit of time today, but I'll just check for questions as we come in on this one. But I also want to make sure that we all understand the process at the high level, and then you adapt it to your specific situation, your specific project, and your specific need. Again, going back to that, defining the problem. So let's jump into the next slide here in terms of the high level process of vendor technology assessment. So technology vendor assessment, the process has 3 key steps. And as I mentioned, always starts with that problem to solve. What are the business problems you're trying to achieve? Be it reduce cost, increase revenue, make some more efficiencies. Maybe you have finding it difficult to get the skills, the technology skills that you need to scale your business to support the application. Maybe the system or technology is very old, and it's you need to just find out a more cost-efficient way of supporting the application, because it's expensive to get the older legacy systems supported these days. So again, define that problem, because then when you have that problem defined, then you can make sure you pick the right technology vendor. So again, frame all these problems as requirements. I want to do something. I want to reduce the cost of our supply chain process. I want to speed up invoice processing. I want to make sure our patches for our upgrades are always done on time and quickly. I want to make sure I have a pool of resources to implement the tech project quickly. So that's another reason to engage a technology vendor. And a lot of the technologies vendors are very good at this. They have specialist skills, and they also have a pool of resources to deliver these technical projects, technical skills. So this is a good way to go if you don't have a lot of these skills in-house. Then next, you need to then evaluate the vendor. So you move on to the evaluate stage. So this always starts with the shortlist. So do your own research, go out online, look at what other people are using out there, what other systems, talk to your friends, colleagues in the industry. Again, be clear on the problem you're trying to solve, and then make sure you evaluate the vendors and do a shortlist of vendors based on their specific strengths. And then you'll also want to look into some specific criteria for evaluation. So is the team local? If you need people to come on site, or if you need to have people in the same time zone, can they support that? The biggest thing as well is client references from these vendors. A lot of the research can be done online, so you can see the client references that they have and the testimonials and recommendations. And if you happen to know them, reach out to them directly. Just say, I saw your recommendation on this product. What was your experience with the implementation? How did you find working with them? So again, the first stage is getting to a shortlist. Then you want to get into the RFP. How are you going to form it? Well, it could be a request for a proposal, but you need to get down to that shortlist to actually bringing them ready for a demo or a pilot. So the next stages are, you could run a RFP, a request for a proposal process, and then to the actual vendor selection if you have a supply chain team or a legal team who wants to help you through with that. But either way, you want to get to know your vendor. So if you're a smaller company, maybe it's just interviews. Maybe it's just going through some interview questions. Again, using your problems to solve, point number 1 there. That'll give you a list of requirements and questions and the evaluation checklist that you use in this evaluate stage number 2. So in summary, as part of the evaluate, do the shortlist based on your research, then get references, speak to actual people who've actually engaged and worked with the vendor you're thinking of using. then move into demos and understanding how they work, which could be the request for proposal RFP process, and really get to know your vendor, meet the actual delivery team, not just the sales team. Sales teams are awesome, but you want to meet the people who are actually going to be delivering the product and the technology to your company. And that's where I really like the demos and the maybe even a proof of concept. You can actually invite a lot of these bigger companies in to do a proof of concept based on your data and your systems for free, typically as well. And again, that helps the vendor get to know you, you get to know the vendor, and you start to understand how you can work together. And then once you've boiled it down to the top one or two that you want to actually go forward with, that's when you move into the actual select stage. So you've boiled it down to the one or two, and then you want to move ahead with actually engaging them to deliver on your project. And here's where it gets really interesting, because you want to make sure you set up a contract that works for both of you. So you may need to involve legal or supply chain departments in your businesses to make sure that they're fully aware of all the terms and conditions in the bigger contracts. But more importantly, again, understand who's going to be working on the project, meet with the vendor, understand the team that's there to deliver, and then talk with them as well. What makes sense from a contract that's going to work for you? Again, it's not a them and us. Don't get into um, a difficult situation with the contract, because if you can't work out the contract, then you're definitely not going to be able to deliver the project well. You're setting up a long-term relationship here, so see it as a partnership, see it as an agreement that works for both sides. Sure, you need to make sure that your interests are met, but do see it as a partnership, because you want to build a long-term relationship with your vendor to ultimately deliver a better product and deliver project, because you're going to be working together in some intense periods of time in the future. And a quick tip on the selection is, once you've picked a vendor, is don't notify the second or third running vendors in your selection until you've actually got a signed contract from your first choice. Again, the reason for that is because sometimes I've seen it where contracts don't go through, they get blown up at the last minute for whatever reason, or it just doesn't get negotiated and we end up having to part ways. So don't let the second and third vendors know until you've actually signed the vendor contract with the first vendor, because then you have a backup plan. You can always go to your second and third choices if the first one doesn't work out. So that's the high level process. I wanted to show you that first, because this is important around the number of steps you need to go through at the highest level to make sure you just don't jump into meeting the technology vendors straight away. Always start with those problems to solve. Do number two, the evaluations and best practice research. Reach out to the testimonials and the client references, and then go through that formal evaluation and selection in number three to make sure you get a really good contract that works as a partnership for everyone. There are much more details to this, folks, and happy to answer any questions on this. If you want to answer a couple of questions that came up already. If there's any other questions, just let me know. Always happy to run a more specific deep dive on this topic, because it is quite extensive. There's a lot to consider. So when we've gone through the technology vendor assessment, I want to deep dive a little bit more on the evaluation questions, point number two here. So let's dive into the questions, the key questions you need to ask. So given the time we have today, I'm only going to cover the high-level questions, but just bear in mind that this is very extensive, because you've identified all the problems, all the requirements, everything you want the vendor to do, including things like location, might even want financials from the company to make sure they're solvent and they have good financial standing, so you can have a long-term financial backing by them as well. But what I'm going to cover here is some of the key questions you need to ask. And these are not the typical RFP questions. These are more based on partnerships and working agreements. So these are questions I've used in my RFP and vendor evaluation and selection. And I've also, when I've been as a vendor selling software, I've also been answering these questions on behalf of the client, so they have full awareness of what they're getting into to help them with the decision as well. So let's get into the 5 questions. So number 1 is, what do you need from us on the project? So you notice this question can be asked by the vendor, but it also can be asked by the business or the client. Because again, as a client, you're asking the vendor, what do you need from us on the project? Which is typically around time, effort, resources, a supporting team to work with the vendor to deliver the technical project. And also the vendor's also asking the client is, what do you need from us? So again, the RFP process or the evaluation is a very formal way of working through it's almost like an interview. So you want to have a more open conversation around, what do you actually need from us? What have you seen on other projects and how will that help us? So asking this question is a good opener to understand what really makes sense for delivering the project and what you can expect from each other as you deliver the project. One of the examples I had with this is when I was working with one of the vendors around the team was remote, 100% remote, but some of their team were offshore, which originally we were a little nervous of because it meant that they weren't available past about 11 o'clock local time. But what it actually meant is they could be doing development overnight while we were working on the project during the day in our local time zone. So it actually accelerated the project quite a bit because we would meet early morning and then very late at night to give them the bug fixes and the changes. But as a result, they actually got the project going quicker because they could be working on the code configuration development while we were working on the project during the day. So initially we were a bit hesitant around that, but when we got to know how this could work, then we realized it actually accelerated the project. So the next key question is, how will you get started on a project? So again, you're coming into a project. This is typically asked by the client to the vendor. How will they get started? How will they get to know the business? How will they get to know the team? What's the process for kicking off the project, the initiation, the workshops you'd expect? And again, this question should be asked on both sides. Both the vendor will ask the client and the client will ask the vendor, because you need to know how you're going to set up this working arrangement. Typically, the vendor has a very specific process on how they start projects. But this is where, as a client, once you know about that process, you can start to adapt to that, start to use it, start to see the process they go through. It's a good way to validate that they know what the vendor knows what they're doing because they've been through this before. And then also, likewise, the vendor can ask the client this as well, because they need to know how the client will kick off the project internally. Again, a big thing I've learned over my career of dealing with vendors is that it's not just about the vendor delivering the project; it's about how the project is going to be kicked off internally within the business as well, and the client as well. Typically, you need to involve other people, as I mentioned before, supply chain or getting people from other teams to support delivery of the project internally. If those are not available, the project doesn't kick off. So you need to make sure you have the right sponsorship and the supporting team and the business side and the client side, as well as on the vendor side. So that's key question number 2. The next key question is, how will you manage resource turnover? And again, you'll notice that this is, although aimed at vendor evaluation, it is also aimed at the client and the business as well, because businesses and clients go through resource turnover. So if we tackle it from the vendor side, again, we're bringing the A team typically for a proposal and the initial sales calls, which is awesome because you get to meet their best. But you want to make sure that those people are available during the project delivery as well. And things change, things happen. There's vacations, there's personal situations. Sometimes people leave the company. So as we have turnover in resources, how are we going to manage that on the project? So again, think about the outcome of the project. We want to make sure the delivery is maintained if resources are turnover. So the first thing you need to do here is just have a resource plan. So it starts with a onboarding for new resources coming on and finishes up with a transition plan for resources turning over, exiting the project. So then you have a very specific plan for if a new resource comes on or a resource leaves, what are the steps they go through? So having that onboarding and that exit off-ramp process is very important. I also like to, when we're negotiating the contract, I also like to make sure we have a specific duration. So for example, if we get notified that the vendor has to turn over a resource, then they'll be available for at least a week during that transition period for questions for the new resource coming in. And typically also, we also want to make sure there's no impact to the project, either financially or by the schedule. So as part of that resource turnover, let's make sure we have an agreement in the contract for making sure that the schedule is maintained. There's no additional cost to the project. So that's the third question about managing resources, because, hey, it's people change. So the fourth question is around what lessons would you apply to our project? So this is aimed from a client or business asking a vendor, saying, hey vendor, when you've done this before, what lessons learned would you apply? How would you do this differently? What have you seen before? Again, it's a good validation question to make sure that they understand how to work in these projects before and what they've seen before. This is how I actually came up with that resource turnover question. Because when I asked the vendor this, they said, yeah, we had a full disclosure, we had some resources turnover on the last project, and we wanted to make sure that we had a transition plan. So now we have that when we come into each of our projects. We have an on-ramp and an off-ramp exit plan for each of our resources should they ever change. So this is just good to understand how you deliver projects, how you work with vendors, because you may think you've done this before with other projects, and you probably have, but every project is unique. That's the definition of a project, because it's a unique endeavor that you'll have never seen before. So lessons learned from both sides are always really valuable going certainly into that evaluation question, and then bring this question up again when you go through the initiation of the project as well in that project kickoff call. Okay, and then next we'll move on to the fifth question. Why do you want to work with us? So again, we're asking the client or the business of the vendor of this, but it works both ways. So why does the client want to work with the vendor, and why does the vendor want to work with the client? Again, this is a really good open question to get to know both sides of the parties involved, because again, you're setting up a long-term partnership here. So why do you want to work with us can result in some of the answers that I've seen and worked with around we're developing this product. So you're getting the core product, but we're actually going to be bringing in some new enhancements to the project, which we'd like to bring to this project if it makes sense. So this client working with us wanted to actually prove out some additional functionality for the software, which we were actually open to as long as it didn't impact the schedule, the budget, or the go live date. The other one was this company, full disclosure, said they hadn't delivered this project before and were really keen to build their book of business and really wanted to work with us. So they actually gave us quite a substantial discount on the cost of the product, because then we could work with them to deliver this project for the first time. And again, a lot of due diligence on that one, because you always want to be nervous of a company that's never done it before with this particular product. But in this case, it actually worked out really well. We did a lot of due diligence up front, and they were actually a really good company to work for. And as a result, we actually got a really good product coming out of this. So again, it's just really good to understand, why do you want to work with us? What do you want to do? What's the relationship setting up? It's a good discovery question to really get to know the vendors, and also for the vendors to get to know the clients and the business. So I'm just going to pause there again, because those are the key vendor evaluation questions that you need to know. There are many others, but these were the 5 that I've learned over my career that are really, really important. Okay, just checking the chat and the questions there. So yep, had a couple there. Thanks for joining. Okay, that's cool. I think we've covered that one. Okay, good stuff. So let's move on to the last slide that I want to show today, which is around how do we make sure we do just a recap on the checklist. So I'm going to show this one here. So here are the 5 points, just to make sure we recap on this and make sure you manage vendors in using the magic to make sure the partnership goes well. So starting with the top team, making sure that they have the team to deliver, so the vendor has a team to deliver. More importantly, and often skip over this, is that the client, you have the team to deliver. So we often think that we'll get the team together once the contract's signed, and that always causes a massive rush and a bit of a scramble to find the right people. So make sure we have the right team on both sides and fully resourced to deliver this new technology. Also check that supply chain are involved, and make sure they're all aware of what's going on. Legal also need to be involved, because sometimes there's contractual and terms and conditions that need to be considered. You can't just sign contracts with big organizations anymore. It needs to have everyone, all the stakeholders involved. And everyone is clear on the 4th point there. Everyone is clear on success, which I now know sounds obvious, but the amount of times that we're not clear on how this should be delivered or what the outcome looks like. And more importantly, we'd set this success up front. Say we go live on a certain date, we have this functionality in the web portal, or we have this speeding up this reduced time on the invoice processing for suppliers. So we have that very clear success defined up front. And then we keep reminding people, and keep reminding ourselves of what that success works through the project. So we set it up front, but then we work through it over and over again during the project, because sometimes success criteria changes. Sometimes the outcome changes, and we want to be very clear on that all the way through. And the last point is a partnership. Again, these engagements between vendors and technology and clients and businesses are a partnership. We used to talk about our outsourced agreements, and I do struggle with that, because now we really want to talk about how we're going to work together. It's an ongoing partnership for many years. The real stress comes in during the delivery of the project, and then times after the project's delivered when you're supporting the product, and you really rely on your vendors and the business to work together to come up with a good solution. Because again, think about the outcome for the impacted stakeholders. At the end of the day, typically we involved in delivery of this are a project team or a one-off initiative to actually get this delivered and implemented. But the real end users or the customers, they're going to be on seeing the benefits of this software or technology in the future. So you want to make sure your partnership maintains that level of service, make sure the quality of the product is all the way through there, to make sure they always get that top quality customer service that they expect. So again, always frame this as a partnership. So those were the 5 checklist items after we went through the process of the vendor assessment process. And this all comes back to how do we manage vendors to make sure that we have the magic to manage them in the right way. And yes, it might appear like voodoo, but at the end of the day, it is truly about how you work together in a partnership. So I hope that was helpful, and just checking the comments there. And yep, again, more than happy to deep dive into any questions you might have on this one. And as we wrap up here, I want to say thank you for joining me. And as always, we're all a group of special technology project enthusiasts, and I'm here and my team here is cheering you on. So as we continue to push, grow, and scale and make a difference with technology, we'll continue down this path, and we'll see you in the next episode.